At 7:23 a.m. on June 18, 1944, Sergeant Jacob Mertens stood at a third-floor window in a farmhouse that was more ruin than shelter outside Carentan, France. He peered through the scope on his Car 98K and fixed his attention on an American machine gun position about 200 yards away. An MG-42 had chewed through 6 of his men in the past hour. He believed that gun was the threat in front of him. He had less than a minute left to live. Just not from the place he was watching. 3 miles to the west, Technical Sergeant Raymond Kozlowski sat perfectly still inside a grain silo. Not beside it, not behind it, inside it. He had been there for 11 hours without food or water, a single bucket for waste, and a Springfield M1903A4 laid across a sand-bagged rest. He'd climbed a rusted ladder in total darkness and lowered himself into the concrete cylinder like he was stepping back into the worst job on a Wisconsin farm. Ray had cut a viewing slit with tin snips and turned that farm structure into a hidden perch. From that narrow opening, he could scan the entire German defensive belt, 37 positions in view, 14 officers singled out by insignia and by the way they moved, spoke, and directed others. Over the past 6 days, he'd taken out 23 of them. The Germans knew their leadership was being hunted. They sent patrols, swept houses, questioned civilians, and searched every reasonable hide. They never thought to look up at the silos. To them, a farm was background noise, equipment, and storage, not terrain. Through his scope, Ray found Mertens. He watched the sergeant's lips move as if issuing quick orders. Mertens leaned forward and pointed toward the American lines. Ray settled his crosshairs low, on the iron cross beneath the collar. He let out part of a breath, held the rest, and pressed the trigger. The Springfield bucked once. Mertens collapsed at the window. Kill number 24. What followed wasn't written in any handbook. It was the practical problem-solving of rural life applied to war, the kind of thinking born from repairing fences and coaxing broken machinery back to life, not from lectures and parade grounds. And by the time the 82nd Airborne pushed through Carentan, German control in that sector was unraveling. Officers stopped showing themselves. NCOs tried to command from behind cover. Radio discipline frayed into confused, panicked chatter, because one dairy farmer from Wisconsin understood elevation, patience, and the value of structures everyone else dismissed. This is the story of an idea, pulled from agricultural work. An innovation that, according to the men who witnessed it, removed 28 enemy officers, prevented an estimated 200 American casualties, and produced a tactic the U.S. Army would later teach without ever properly attaching the inventor's name to it. Raymond Kozlowski never received a medal for the days he spent inside those silos. He didn't ask for one. But other snipers wanted to know what he'd done, how he'd done it, and why it worked so well. And when he finally explained it, the method spread fast across the European front, like fire racing through dry hay. Ray grew up in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, on 80 acres of dairy land. He was the second of 5 boys, which meant the worst tasks usually found their way to him. He shoveled stalls, repaired fence lines, and climbed into silos to clear clogged grain. Work everyone hated because it was dark, tight, and dangerous. 40 feet up a corroded ladder, swinging a sledgehammer while praying the silage wouldn't shift and bury you. Ray did it anyway, without making a scene. He spent hours up there alone, boxed in by concrete and the sour smell of fermented corn, learning what it meant to stay quiet and still. On his uncle's farm, he started shooting groundhogs, pests that made holes big enough to cripple cattle. His uncle paid a nickel per tail. Ray was 13 when he dropped his first one from 200 yards. His uncle paced the distance out himself and didn't believe it until the steps proved it. By 15, Ray was the best shot in the county. In 1937, he won the state youth competition and brought home a trophy his mother kept on the mantle. His father wasn't impressed. Shooting was fine, he said, but the cows still needed milking. When the war arrived in 1941, Ray was 22 and technically exempt, an essential agricultural worker. His father needed him at home. But 3 of Ray's cousins enlisted in the first month. By spring, one of them came back in a flag-draped coffin. Ray couldn't shake the guilt. In October 1942, he walked into the recruiting office in Sheboygan and signed up. His father didn't speak to him for 2 weeks. At Camp McCoy, marksmanship instructors noticed him immediately. Tight groups, consistent centers, no matter the range. They asked where he learned to shoot like that. Ray answered with one word: groundhogs. The Army sent him on to sniper training at Fort Benning. He finished second in his class. First place went to a competitive shooter from Colorado. Ray didn't care about the ranking. He cared about practical distance, wind, and what a bullet actually did in the field. By April 1944, he was in England with the 82nd Airborne Division, assigned to headquarters as a designated marksman. Most snipers worked in pairs. Ray preferred being alone. After years in silos, he didn't need conversation to stay steady. The turning point came on D-Day +7, June 13th, when the 82nd began pushing toward Carentan. German resistance wasn't random. It was organized, methodical, and lethal. Machine gun nests were tied to mortar teams, and sniper overwatch covered the lanes of movement. The Americans advanced, and the Germans selected who died. First, the radio men, then the officers, then anyone clearly issuing commands. At 9:15 a.m., Private First Class Eddie Kowalski took a round through the throat. Ray knew him from Sheboygan. Different family, same last name. Eddie's last words were for his mother. He was gone in 40 seconds. Ray searched for the shooter for 20 minutes and found nothing. At 11:40 a.m., Corporal James Devlin was hit while leading his squad across an open field. One shot, dead center. Devlin had been Ray's roommate in England. They'd played cards almost every night for 3 months. Devlin never saw what killed him. Ray searched again and still couldn't spot the rifle that did it. By June 14th, the 82nd had lost 11 men to sniper fire. Not shells, not machine guns, but precise rifle shots from positions that stayed invisible. The Germans owned elevation. They shot from church steeples, barn lofts, water towers. American doctrine said to suppress with artillery and move infantry forward, but artillery was needed elsewhere. Tanks couldn't raise their guns high enough. Infantry couldn't see what they needed to kill. On June 15th, at 3:20 p.m., Lieutenant Marcus Freeman, the officer coordinating sniper teams, was dropped with a single shot. Ray was 50 yards away. He saw Freeman's head whip back, read the angle, and tracked it to a second-floor farmhouse window. Ray moved to set up a countershot, but by the time he reached a firing position, the German was already gone. That night, Ray couldn't sleep. Eddie's face kept flashing in his mind. Devlin's playing cards scattered in the dirt. Freeman slumped against a hedgerow. The Germans weren't just better shooters. They were using the landscape correctly. Elevation, concealment, multiple hides, fire once, move, disappear. Basic sniper craft executed with discipline. The Americans tried to answer with ground-level positions and aggressive patrols. It wasn't enough. At dawn, Ray walked through newly captured ground and studied Normandy's bocage. The hedgerows, the small fields, the scattered farms, the churches in every village. And then he noticed something else. Barns and silos everywhere. Tall concrete cylinders, 20 to 40 feet high, built for grain storage. Many were abandoned. The Germans ignored them. To soldiers, they looked like farm junk, not military real estate. Ray stopped at an older concrete silo, about 32 feet by his rough estimate, with a ladder bolted to the outside. He climbed up and looked out. The view was unreal. 3 miles of visibility. Every hedge line, every crossroads, every building the Germans were using. From that height, the very sniper positions tormenting the 82nd were easier to read. A church steeple 2 miles north, a barn loft a mile east, a water tower a 1.5 miles northeast. From up there, those hides weren't mysterious anymore. They were exposed. Inside the silo was dim and foul. Old grain, bird droppings, stale air. A rusted hatch at the top opened into the cylinder. Ray lowered himself in. The interior was wide, around 15 feet across, and mostly empty besides debris. The walls were thick concrete with steel reinforcement. Small ventilation slots ran up the sides every 10 feet or so, openings about 6 inches wide and 4 inches tall. Ray pressed his face to one and looked out. It was perfect. He could see everything. Nobody could see him. Climbing back down, Ray's thoughts wouldn't slow. Every silo in Normandy was a ready-made sniper hide. Elevation, concealment, protection. The Germans were choosing buildings because buildings made sense to soldiers. Buildings were the first places anyone searched. Silos were overlooked because they felt civilian, because people didn't treat farm infrastructure as tactical terrain. But Ray did. He'd spent too much of his life inside those structures not to understand what they offered. He also knew the risk. A silo wasn't in any training program. The Army taught ground hides, window positions, natural camouflage, not vertical concrete tubes with steep downward angles and limited exits. If he misjudged it, if he got trapped or discovered, he would die alone in the dark. So on June 16th, he prepared. He found an abandoned silo about 2 miles from German lines and practiced with his rifle. The shooting angle was harsh, around 40 degrees down, which changed everything about his hold and his corrections. Bullet drop didn't behave the way it did on flat ground. He fired test rounds into empty fields, adjusted his scope, and learned what the steep angle demanded. The ventilation slots were too tight. He took tin snips and widened one. 6 inches became 10, just enough to fit the scope and the barrel. Inside the heat was brutal. The June sun baked the concrete until it felt like an oven. Ray sweat through his uniform in an hour. He realized he'd need water, lots of it, food that wouldn't spoil, a simple way to deal with waste. The bucket. And above all, he'd have to remain completely still for long stretches. No shifting, no scraping, no careless sounds. One mistake would give him away. That night, Captain Robert Henshaw gathered the men and delivered the latest count. 11 more casualties. The German snipers were winning. Henshaw asked for volunteers for aggressive counter-sniper patrols. Ray didn't raise his hand. After the briefing ended, he found the captain alone. "Sir, I've got an idea." Henshaw looked him over. "Go ahead, Kozlowski." "The silos," Ray said. "No one's using them. I want to." Henshaw frowned. "For what?" "Shooting positions," Ray answered. "Height, concealment." "Those things are traps," the captain said. "If you get pinned up there, you're finished." "I grew up in them, sir," Ray replied. "I know what they are." Henshaw studied him for a long moment. Then he gave him the hard warning. "If you do this, you're doing it alone. No support, no backup. And if it goes bad, I'm not sending anyone to drag you out, understood?" "Understood, sir." "And one more thing," Henshaw added. "You drop an officer, they'll hunt you. You drop several, they'll tear the countryside apart." Ray nodded once. "Let them." On the night of June 17th, at 9:45 p.m., Ray packed in darkness. A Springfield M1903A4 with an Unertal scope, 200 rounds of M2 armor-piercing ammunition, 4 canteens, 6 D rations, and a handful of chocolate bars. 1 bucket, 2 wool blankets, 50 feet of rope, tin snips, a small folding shovel, binoculars, a notebook, and pencil. At 11:20 p.m., he slipped through Allied lines. He told the sentries he was heading out on patrol. No one challenged him. Snipers moved differently than other troops. Ray walked northwest, stayed off roads, used hedgerows for cover. German patrols were active. Twice he heard voices and locked himself motionless until they passed. The target silo sat about 3.5 miles from American lines and roughly 2 miles from German positions, on an abandoned farm with no lights and no movement. Ray approached from the south, checked for mines, and found none. The French farmer who owned it was either dead or long gone. The silo stood as a dark concrete column against the night, about 38 feet tall, darker than the sky behind it. Ray took the ladder slowly. Each rung creaked. Rust flaked under his fingers. One slip from that height would be fatal, so he tested every step. At the top, the hatch resisted. He worked it with the handle of his shovel, metal on metal, too loud. He stopped and listened. Silence. He tried again. The hatch finally shifted. He raised it a few inches, looked into the blackness, and then dropped his pack inside. It hit the bottom with a dull thud. Ray climbed in after it. The air inside felt cooler than outside. The concrete held the day's heat, but let it go slowly. As his eyes adjusted, he saw moonlight leaking through the vents in thin silver bars across the curved walls. He chose a position in the northeast side, roughly 32 feet up, where 2 ventilation slots gave him options. He widened the upper slot with tin snips, pausing after every few cuts to listen. The opening was reinforced with rebar, so he worked around the metal instead of through it. After 20 minutes, hands cramping, the slot had become about 12 inches wide and 8 inches tall. Enough. He arranged sandbags, 4 of them, into a stable rest for the rifle. The downward angle was punishing, around 42 degrees. He'd have to brace his body differently, lock in and become part of the concrete, because once dawn came, he couldn't move. He kept rehearsing the setup until it felt inevitable. Lying flat didn't work, too cramped, too awkward. Sitting upright was better. In the end, he settled into a kneeling posture that gave him the cleanest stability, even if he knew his knees would punish him by morning. He unrolled the blankets, one folded under him as padding against the concrete, the other saved for later. June in Normandy wasn't brutal, but higher up the air cooled fast after sunset. He placed the bucket in the far corner, away from the firing slit, an attempt at keeping a shred of dignity. Next, he staged everything like a mechanic, laying out tools before a repair job. Rations, canteens, ammunition, within easy reach. Once he committed, he wouldn't be standing again for at least half a day. After midnight, he eased into position, put his eye behind the glass, and slowly swept the black landscape. In the dark, nothing gave itself away. That was fine. He would wait for first light. Waiting wasn't new to him. He'd spent childhood hours in silos, listening for his father's voice to call him down. The Army taught snipers patience, but Ray's patience had been built long before uniforms and orders. He understood the math of the risk, too. If the Germans found him, there was no clean escape. The ladder outside was exposed. They could shoot him on the way down or ring the base and keep him trapped until he starved. He had considered that outcome and decided it didn't outweigh what had already happened. Eddie was gone. Devlin was gone. Freeman was gone. 11 others, taken by invisible rifles. Ray could either stop the next deaths or die trying. That was the only equation that mattered. Legally, he wasn't worried about punishment. Henshaw had approved the idea. On your own wasn't the same as forbidden. Still, operating this far forward with no support broke protocol. If Ray was captured, the consequences would ripple back to the division. Henshaw would have plausible distance. Ray would have none. He didn't care. Regulations hadn't protected Eddie. Hours dragged. His knees began to throb. He shifted his weight by millimeters, found a slightly better angle, and let the blanket take the edge off the cold. He ate a piece of a ration bar, sipped water, and checked his sight picture again. The reticle was sharp. He had set his zero for 300 yards. Most targets out there would be farther, and he was ready to compensate. Sleep never came. Adrenaline kept him wired. Anger kept him focused. Staring into the blackness, his mind drifted to groundhogs, how they froze when they sensed danger, how they could be waited out if you were willing to hold still longer than they could. The rifle wasn't the real weapon. Patience was. The rifle was just the tool that made patience lethal. You couldn't rush a harvest, and you couldn't rush a shot. As the sky began to pale, the world rebuilt itself in layers. First, the hedgerows took shape, then roofs and tree lines, then roads and intersections. Soon he could pick out the German positions he'd mapped, the steeple, the barn, the farmhouses, exactly where they had been yesterday and exactly where they'd be again when the day started moving. A German soldier came out of a farmhouse and walked to a well, drew water, drank, and lingered in the open. Ray watched him through the scope and did nothing. Enlisted men weren't the goal. Officers were. Officers made the decisions, coordinated defenses, and held the whole machine together. Break the officers, and the system began to fail. A little later, another man appeared with the markings of a sergeant. He carried a map case and moved with purpose into a building that looked like it was being used for coordination. Ray logged it mentally. Useful information, but still not the target he was hunting. Then, near the church, an officer stepped out. Lieutenant Klaus Becker. Ray knew the name by reputation, bold, capable, and linked to a string of American losses. Becker wore his cap, binoculars in hand, and walked into open ground as if the battlefield belonged to him. He raised the binoculars and studied the American side. Ray settled in. He judged the distance, just over 800 yards. Light wind shifting across the line, a steep downward angle from his position. He adjusted his aim with deliberate care, slowed his breathing until the world narrowed to the center of the scope, and pressed the trigger. Inside the silo, the report was amplified, a sharp concussion in a concrete drum that rang his ears. He didn't flinch. Through the glass, he saw Becker fold, hands to chest, falling backward. 2 soldiers rushed out and dragged him inside, but it didn't matter. The armor-piercing round had done what it was meant to do. Ray worked the bolt smoothly, catching the spent casing so nothing could clatter onto concrete. No noise, no trace. Then he waited. He needed to see their reaction. Soon movement increased. Men shifted between buildings with new caution. Becker's collapse had created confusion, and Ray could read it in the way they hesitated before crossing open ground. Officers appeared briefly, retreated again, reappeared, trying to regain control. Their instinct would be standard: find the shooter, suppress him, then send a patrol to finish the job. But they were looking in the wrong places. The American lines were far to the south. From their perspective, the shot must have come from that direction, or from some obvious structure nearby. They searched the east. They checked buildings. They sent patrols along the hedgerows. They investigated barns, farmhouses, the church itself. Nobody looked at the silos. Nobody treated a concrete grain tower as a fighting position. A while later, a captain emerged from a stone farmhouse, Hauptmann Werner Schultz, identifiable even at distance by the insignia and the way others deferred around him. He carried a radio handset and stepped into open ground, speaking as if trying to reach higher command for support. Maybe artillery, maybe reconnaissance. Ray let him settle into a predictable stance. He measured the distance, over 1,000 yards now. The wind had picked up slightly, quartering across the shot. The angle was still steep. He made his correction, controlled his breathing, and fired. Schultz dropped the handset, grabbed at his throat, and went down hard. 2 officer kills in less than 2 hours. Now the field began to tilt toward panic. Ray cycled the bolt again, caught the casing again, and watched the scattered reactions through the scope. Some soldiers dove for cover, some sprinted between walls, some froze as if their brains couldn't process where death was coming from. Coordination depends on confidence. Confidence evaporates when leadership dies without warning. Later that morning, Sergeant Jacob Mertens appeared in a third-floor window, directing fire toward the American positions. Ray recognized him as well: aggressive, effective, responsible for casualties. Mertens leaned forward, pointed, and issued orders like he was conducting an orchestra. Ray corrected for range and wind, set the crosshairs, and fired once. Mertens jerked back and vanished from the window. Ray didn't wait for a second look. He didn't need it. He had done this enough times to know what the body language meant. 3 kills in a little over 2 hours. Now the crisis was visible in the way they behaved. Men stopped exposing themselves. NCOs began leading from behind walls and door frames. Messages took longer to move. Patrols searched harder, more aggressively, and still kept ignoring the one place that mattered. Then a staff car arrived, A Kubelwagen rolling up like something that didn't belong on a front line. 3 officers stepped out, moving fast, heads down, rushing toward a farmhouse. One of them was Senior, an Oberst, an army colonel carrying a map case. Higher leadership had come forward to see what was happening. That alone told Ray how badly the situation was destabilizing. The colonel had to cross a short stretch of open ground to reach the door. Ray's pulse jumped. This was a rare window, and it would close in seconds. Ray judged the distance, read the wind that had shifted direction, factored the downward angle, and aimed where the man would be, not where he was. He pressed the trigger. The colonel staggered, grabbed the doorframe as if trying to hold himself upright, and then collapsed. The 2 captains lunged to pull him inside, but Ray had already seen enough. That was a fatal hit. 4 kills, roughly 3 hours. From that moment, the German side felt leaderless at the tactical level. The machine still existed, rifles, mortars, squads, but the guiding hands were being removed one by one. Through the rest of the day, Ray waited, watched, and learned how they tried to adapt. They began using covered routes. They moved in shorter bursts. They tried to keep officers under roofs and behind walls. But command requires exposure, even brief exposure. And Ray was built to exploit brief moments. In the afternoon, a junior officer appeared while directing a mortar team. Ray watched him long enough to confirm the role and then took the shot. The lieutenant went down and the mortar crew abandoned the position. Later, a senior NCO coordinating ammunition resupply stepped into view. Ray put him down and the resupply froze. Later still, another young officer tried to lead an assault element across open ground. Ray fired, the leader fell, and the assault faltered into retreat. By sunset, Ray had taken 7 targets in a single day. His knees felt like they were on fire. His back ached from holding the same posture. His eyes burned from hours of glass and strain. He drank more water, forced down another ration bar, and ignored the bucket's smell. Darkness brought a different kind of relief. Less visibility, fewer targets, fewer reasons to keep the scope glued to his face. When night fully settled, he let himself lean back against the cold wall and listened to the distant sounds. Artillery in the distance, scattered small arms fire. He could see the change even without hearing their radios. Delayed reactions, confused movement, units acting without cohesion. The Americans were pushing. The Germans were giving ground. Leadership loss was turning order into improvisation. Ray thought about Eddie, about Devlin, about Freeman, about the others. Revenge wasn't the point, but it was impossible not to feel it. He had stopped more deaths today, and he meant to stop more tomorrow. The Germans still held Carentan. The 82nd still needed the pressure relieved. Ray still had ammunition. He still had the position. He still had what mattered most: patience. He finished his ration, drank water, wrapped himself in the blanket, and tried to sleep. It came slowly. The concrete was harder than any bunk, and the darkness was complete. But he had slept in silos before. This one was just quieter, and far more important. Before dawn, he woke again for his second day. His knees were stiff, his back protested every movement. He ate, drank, used the bucket, and returned to the firing slit while the sky was still dim. The enemy side looked different now. Movement was cautious, minimal. Officers stayed indoors. When they had to move, they did it like shadows, doorway to vehicle, vehicle to building, never lingering in the open. They had learned, but functioning still required moments of exposure, and Ray lived from moments. Later that morning, Sergeant Mertens appeared again, this time in a different building. The Germans were rotating positions, trying to avoid patterns. Smart. Mertens directed fire for less than a minute. Ray didn't rush. He waited for the posture that meant certainty. The lean forward, the point. The moment a man forgets he can be seen. Ray fired. Mertens dropped. As the day went on, more targets showed themselves briefly. Senior NCOs, lieutenants, a captain. Ray took them when he could, always in short windows, always with the same discipline. Observe, identify, adjust. Fire once, work the bolt quietly, catch the casing, and go still again. By evening, whatever order had existed on the German side was coming apart. Ray couldn't hear their radio traffic, but he could read it in the field. Hesitant movement, delayed responses, squads acting independently, leadership avoiding any visible role. The command structure wasn't merely damaged, it was being severed. Days later, on the American side, a staff sergeant named Thomas Reeves was scouting from a hedgerow when he watched an officer step out of a farmhouse and then collapse as if struck by lightning. Reeves scanned for the shooter. The angle didn't make sense from the American lines. No nearby building showed movement. It looked impossible. That afternoon it happened again, and then again. Reeves counted officer deaths, precise, clean, always from nowhere he could identify. Somebody was hunting them. Somebody skilled. Reeves asked around. The only answer anyone gave was vague and unhelpful. Kozlowski was out on a long-range patrol. Eventually, Reeves found Captain Henshaw and asked the question directly. What was happening to the German officers? Henshaw stared at him for a beat, then gave him a slow nod that wasn't an answer so much as a warning. Keep that to yourself, Sergeant. Who's doing it? Reeves finally asked himself. Whoever it was, it had to be someone who understood farming. Reeves didn't fully get what that meant at first, but he stopped pushing the question. That night he stared at a distant silo for 20 minutes straight and saw nothing. No flash, no movement, no sign of a shooter. Then the next morning another German officer went down, and Reeves realized something that made his skin prickle. That silo sat exactly where it needed to be for the angle. He climbed a tree and studied the silo through binoculars. Still nothing. But now he understood. 2 days later, Reeves caught Ray at the command post, back for resupply after more than 2 weeks in the field. 16 days forward, 23 confirmed kills. Reeves kept his voice low and simple. The silos. Ray looked at him like he'd misheard. What about them? That's where you're shooting from. Ray didn't answer. Not yes, not no. Reeves pressed anyway. How? Ray finally gave him a short, flat truth. I grew up in them. Can anyone do it? Ray's eyes stayed steady. Anyone who isn't scared of tight spaces. Reeves nodded. I grew up on a ranch. I'm not claustrophobic. Ray held the silence for a beat, then gave instructions as if he were telling someone how to survive a storm. Then find the silo. Bring water. Bring patience. By June 22nd, Reeves was set up 2 miles east of Ray's position. Different silo, different slice of the front. The next day, he took his first officer. The day after that, his second. After that, it didn't spread through memos or briefings. It spread the way real field tricks always spread, through quiet talk and careful listening. No official channel, no paperwork, just snipers sharing what worked. Kozlowski's using silos, 30 feet up, perfect concealment. They never check them. Within days, more Americans were doing it across the Carentan. 4 snipers in silos, then 9, then 17. German reports started mentioning elevated shots, but the searches stayed predictable. They tore through buildings, checked water towers, climbed church steeples, finding nothing, because they were still hunting in the places soldiers always hunted. They still didn't treat farm structures as terrain. They treated them as scenery. In early July, a Luftwaffe reconnaissance officer flew over Normandy on a routine photo run. Analysts reviewed the prints and noted something odd. Multiple silos sitting within a few miles of the German line. The note went nowhere. The conclusion was automatic. Farm buildings, civilian use, no tactical value. Not long after, a German platoon leader named Rudolf Hartmann moved through a contested village where American fire kept arriving from above. Clean, precise, merciless. Hartmann ordered his men to sweep buildings. They found no shooter. One enlisted man pointed at the silos. Hartmann looked at the concrete cylinders. 40 feet of smooth wall, exposed ladder, no obvious cover. and dismissed the idea. "No one would use those," he said. "Too exposed, too easy to trap." He was wrong. That afternoon, Hartmann was killed by a shot fired from around 800 yards by a sniper hidden in a silo Hartmann had walked past earlier that day. By mid-July, German officers in Normandy began operating under new habits. Don't step into open ground. Don't stop moving. Don't rise above the skyline. Radios shifted to coded language. Orders were passed in murmurs. The Wehrmacht's tactical sharpness dulled, not because America suddenly brought more firepower, but because American patience was cutting the throat of German leadership wherever the landscape allowed it. On July 18th, American intelligence intercepted a German transmission. The translation said something like, "American snipers are operating from farm structures, possibly grain storage. Use extreme caution within 2 kilometers of silos." The intelligence officer who read it paused on the phrase grain storage, confused, and filed the paper without making it a priority. Meanwhile, the tactic kept growing, not by official doctrine, but by shared experience. Men swapped methods: how to climb without noise, how to widen ventilation slots, how to manage waste, how to ration water, how to compute steep-angle shots. No engineer approval, no stamped forms. Just rural knowledge meeting battlefield necessity. By August, estimates suggested roughly 40 American snipers were working from silos across France. By September, the number was higher, and the idea jumped into other theaters. Italy, then Belgium, then deeper into Germany, because wherever there was agriculture, there were silos. And wherever there were silos, there were men who understood what those structures could hide. The numbers told a story. In the 2 weeks before Ray climbed into his first silo, snipers in that Normandy sector averaged about 1 to 2 confirmed kills per man per week. Officer kills were rare, maybe 1 a month per sniper. Losses to German precision fire sat around 11%. In the weeks after silo tactics spread, confirmed kills climbed sharply, several per sniper per week. Officer kills became frequent rather than exceptional. German losses to sniper fire multiplied, and American losses to German precision shooting dropped to about 6%, a reduction that changed how fast units could move and how boldly leaders could operate. By late July, after-action reports from the 82nd mentioned a noticeable decline in German command effectiveness in the sectors they fought through. The paperwork credited aggressive counter-sniper work and better positioning. It didn't mention silos. It didn't mention Ray. It was framed as improvement, not innovation. In August, the Army's Ordnance Branch sent 2 engineers to investigate why the sniper results had shifted so dramatically. They interviewed shooters, examined their hides, and climbed into silos themselves. Their conclusion was blunt. Grain storage structures offered elevation, concealment, and protection, and should be evaluated for use elsewhere. The report sat on a desk in Washington for nearly 2 months. By then, the war was moving fast. France was being liberated. Germany was the next goal. Farm infrastructure didn't feel urgent anymore. On paper, it looked like yesterday's trick, but the snipers didn't forget. In October, during the push through Belgium, Staff Sergeant Michael O'Brien found a silo outside a town and set up inside. He took 3 German officers in 2 days. In November, Corporal James Whitmore used a silo near a forest line and logged 6 kills in 4 days. In December, during the Battle of the Bulge, multiple American snipers operated from silos across the Ardennes and reportedly removed dozens of German officers over a few weeks. In the sectors where it was used, leadership disruption added friction to German defense and helped Allied momentum. Conservative estimates credited silo tactics with saving around 200 American lives between June and December 1944. Post-war analysts later suggested it reduced German command effectiveness by a significant margin in areas where it was employed, and that officer losses rose sharply in those zones. Those conclusions were tied to a study produced after the war and kept restricted for decades. In the official record, the credit went elsewhere: improved training, better optics, better rifles. No mention of silos. No mention of Ray. No mention of farmers who saw a battlefield where others only saw a farm. The innovation was absorbed and stripped of its origin. After the war, sniper doctrine was revised. A new manual included a section on non-traditional elevated positions, water towers, industrial frames, radio masts, and in one small paragraph, it also pointed out that agricultural storage facilities could be useful in rural environments. No attribution, no history, just a line in doctrine, like the idea had always belonged to the army. Ray survived the war. He was in Germany when it ended. Over 11 months, he had killed 28 German officers, never wounded, never captured. In August, he returned to Wisconsin by bus from New York. His father met him at the station in Sheboygan. They shook hands, didn't hug. His father asked if he was ready to work. Ray said yes. He spent the next 4 decades on the same 80 acres, running the same dairy operation. He married in 1947, Elizabeth, raised 3 children, and almost never spoke about the war. If someone asked, he'd say, "I did my part." His kids knew he'd been a sniper, but not what that truly meant. They didn't press. He didn't offer. In the early 1960s, a reporter from the Milwaukee Journal tracked him down after hearing his name connected to Normandy sniping. The reporter wanted an interview. Ray refused and said he had cows waiting. When the reporter pushed, Ray hung up. Years later, at a reunion of the 82nd Airborne, he saw Tommy Reeves again for the first time in more than 3 decades. They talked for hours. Reeves thanked him and said the silo method had saved his life in Belgium. Ray nodded, quiet as ever, and made it clear he didn't want the story resurrected. Reeves understood. They didn't speak of it again. In 1981, Ray's mother died. At the funeral, his old shooting trophy was still on the mantel, State Youth Champion, 1937. His daughter asked if she could keep it. Ray said yes, and told her it came from a time before he understood what shooting could mean. He retired in the late 1980s, passed the farm to his youngest son, moved into a smaller place in town, and filled his days with reading, gardening, and checkers at the community center. In the early 1990s, a military historian finally found him and asked about the silo tactics. This time, Ray agreed. They talked for 3 hours. The historian filled pages of notes and eventually asked the question everyone always asked: did he have any regret?